This video is for level 12-2 training. In this training, we will be discussing changes in the United States after World War II. In this training, we will be focusing on the US economy after World War II, population change, migration and immigration, transportation, and new advances in medicine and technology. In the years following World War II, the United States experienced astonishing economic growth and the US became the world's wealthiest economy. During the Depression, Americans could not buy the goods they wanted. The economy improved because of World War II, but wartime restrictions and limited economic growth through rationing kept people's spending down. When the war ended and restrictions were lifted, people began purchasing products they had a desire for during the war rapidly. As demand soared, businesses employed more people to produce more goods. This created a cycle in which people bought new goods, leading businesses to hire more workers who in turn bought more goods. Consumerism skyrocketed, which stimulated the entertainment industry to invent new ways for Americans to amuse themselves. Television had a powerful impact both socially and economically. By the mid 1960s, 90% of US families had TVs and spent a majority of their free time watching it. After the war, the rate of TVs skyrocketed to an average of 250,000 TV sets being bought a month from a mere 17,000 TV sets that were owned following the end of the war. That's a huge increase. In the 1950s, a wave of corporate mergers occurred. This period saw the emergence of conglomerates. Conglomerates are firms with holdings in a variety of industries. Companies like McDonald's fast food restaurants provided new ways of selling through franchises. A franchise is a business that allows a company to distribute its products or services through retail outlets owned by independent owners. Franchises were great for consumers because they stressed quality and sameness no matter where one was in the United States. Many critics claimed that the growth of the franchise business is growing towards America's lack of originality and evidence that the United States is a bland nation who eats bland food and watches bland TV rather than a nation with small mom and pop restaurants that are unique to the community. Upon soldiers returning home following World War II, they quickly made up for lost time by marrying and having children. Americans had put off having babies because of the Depression and the war, but now they took advantage of the post war peace and increased wealth from the economy to start new families and have more children. As a result, people married at younger ages and in greater numbers. Women were having more babies at a faster rate. This led to population experts terming this time as the baby boom. In 1957, at the peak of the baby boom, one American baby was born every 7 seconds, a grand total of 4.3 million for 1 year. With increased population, just think about how all of these extra people will need food, clothes, gadgets, housing, and services. This will also contribute to a larger economy as there is an even higher demand for products. Also shifting the population in the United States is the Immigration Act of 1965. Prior to the Immigration Act of 1965, immigrants were restricted on a quota system in the US that heavily favored European countries as opposed to countries in Africa, Asia, or Latin America. The new laws marked a radical change from previous immigration laws. It allowed more immigration from third world countries like the ones from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The new law greatly changed America's demographics as a country. Hispanics became the fastest growing minority in the United States. An influx of Hispanic immigrants led to more funding for Spanish language media like the radio and more school funding for students who do not speak English. As these new immigrants became U.S. citizens, it also changed major political parties' stances as they worked to capture their votes. The new law also welcomed more immigrants from skills or professions rather than again just basing off what country they are from. Following World War II, there was a large shift from wanting to live in an urban city to wanting to live in a suburb. This is partially because home ownership skyrocketed and the increased car ownership allowed for people to leave the cities and own their own home in a neighborhood. At the same time, a large influx of African Americans were leaving the rural South as well as an increase of Hispanic immigrants were moving into urban cities like Chicago, New York, Detroit, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. The movement from cities to suburbs had many effects socially and politically. As predominantly middle class families left the city lost a lot of tax revenue, which is used to fund projects, schools, and other services. Cities, which were once Republican strongholds, became increasingly Democratic cities who worked to serve the minorities like African Americans and Hispanics. Loss of tax revenue led to an increase of urban decay, and the homes and buildings in the cities lost their value. Many big urban inner cities today have deteriorating buildings that are not worth a lot of money because of this large shift that happened after World War II as middle class families left for the suburbs. Similar to the effects of the suburbs, the Rust Belt had a huge impact on northern cities. I am referring to the cities in the states of Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. These states experienced a lot of prosperity during World War II because they were heavy industries centered states and cities. Detroit and Cleveland, being two of the bigger cities that supplied many wartime machinery and provided many jobs, faced great loss in the post war decades. As jobs dried up, people left those cities, leading to abandoned buildings and rusting machinery. Many of these cities are still working to build back today. The Rust Belt also took great population hits because of the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt is in the southern states that were very undesirable for many years due to the extreme heat. But as air conditioning advanced, people began to leave the dead northern cities and go south. They also found that many of these states had lower taxes, cheaper housing, mild winters, and more space. Businesses began to move south because there were less labor unions, which made for cheaper labor. This led to an increase of jobs in the South, leading to more people migrating from the North to the big cities in the South. After World War II, unlike European countries, car ownership skyrocketed. Americans love their cars and are heavily dependent on them to go from place to place. This impacted population change as people could live farther away from where they worked and also helped increase the economy as people bought these cars. Other industries boomed as well. In 1956, to meet the explosion of automobile ownership, President Eisenhower signed the Interstate Highway Act. Over $30 million of federal funds was used to build the largest public works project in U.S. history. 41,000 miles of interstate highways were built. Federal funds also made it cheaper for the development of commercial airplanes, which significantly changed the economy by transporting goods and people across the country within hours. In the post war period, there is an astonishing growth in medicine. New antibiotics are created to help cure serious diseases. The vaccine for polio is founded, which attacks the central nervous system and causes paralysis to thousands of Americans, including FDR. There are many other advances in medicine, but most importantly, the average life expectancy of an American increased from 63 years old in 1940 to 70 years old in 1960. Science continues to advance as well, with the creation of the computer by the military, which was used to store data, which eventually turns into a way of communicating with one another to eventually what we have today. Satellites continue to advance in science behind DNA allows for scientists to discover more diseases. The decades following World War II experienced many changes in the US economically and socially for the better.